of 01. Big show tonight. Big show tonight. We're continuing our discussion of 1 year since the PPP was installed office. The PPP itself has been given its version of that 1 year. And here on this side of the divide, we are given the other side, that is the opposition perspective of what has happened in the last year. We have tonight, finally, the leader of the opposition in Parliament, Mr. Joe Harmon. As the audience, you know, you've been calling Mr. Harmon for a long time. We finally got him, and he's going to be here for the first part of the program. And then later on, we will have representatives of three opposition parties, the PNC, Amanzar Walton Desir, the AFC, Miss Catherine Hughes, and Takumo Gunse from the WPA. But we'll start with Mr. Hyman. Mr. Hyman, welcome to Politics 101.
Thank you, David. And I'm able to satisfy you and the thousands and thousands of viewers that look and listen to this program. So I'm very happy to be here tonight, and I definitely could not resist your invitation to come and speak on this program. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Let me start right off. We have been describing what happened last year as an electoral coup. An electoral coup by the PPP. That is the way in which the PPP was able to manipulate the electoral system to bring about regime change. And it wasn't a military coup. It was what we call electoral coup. Respond to that characterization. Do you think that it's a justifiable characterization?
Thanks, David. You know, when military men speak about coup, people associate it only with a bloody coup with guns blazing and so on. But in fact, this was one in which the coup took place in the ballot boxes. And it was only because we were able to have a recount before an election petition was filed that we were able to actually determine immediately what the PPP had done. As a result of that, we've actually put out a documentary called The Theft of Democracy, and it highlights all of these egregious acts which the PPP had done during the election of 2020. There are so many things that occurred during that period of time, but I just wanted to deal with what has happened since then. You see, the PPP have put out a narrative in which they are saying that we had a stalled democracy for 5 months. That's a narrative that they've put out there. But those of us who've actually been involved in the process and those who are actually following it very closely will recognize that what you had was an installation of the PPP by forces that were not in the ballot boxes with respect to ballot boxes. They were installed by external forces who had an interest in what was happening in Guyana, and an interest which was larger than the Guyanese population. I recall a particular statement made by one ambassador to the chairman of the Elections Commission that said that these elections were bigger than Guyana. And I had to retort that these elections were about Guyana, they're about Guyanese, and they are about us. And any other interests, whether regional, international, or what, has to be less than the interests of the Guyanese people, the men and women of this country, who brave the rain and brave the sun to actually go and put the ballot in a box. And they expect that ballot that they put there will represent the popular will of the people when it was counted. But certainly that was not the case, and we know about the excesses that took place, particularly on the Lower East Coast. The over 11,000 or so votes that were there that were counted that did not have any statutory document in the ballot boxes, over 47 boxes. And of course, there are 2 boxes on other area. That really made it about 49 boxes with no statutory documents in them. And of course, there were several other issues in relation to persons who were dead that voted, and there's the evidence about it. Those who were not in Guyana on the 2nd of March 2020 and voted. So we have all of these issues on which this regime now sits. They sit on those fraudulent votes and want to lecture the rest of Guyana about who are riggers and who are not riggers. But they are the ones who are benefiting from this fraud that took place. They are the ones who are benefiting from it. And therefore, the point I make always is that why would anybody want to get involved in a fraudulent transaction and has no benefit to gain from it? The only benefit that you can see here in Guyana is the benefit that goes to the PPP and their friends and family, and the rest of us, we are bearing the burden for this last year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joseph Harmon, opposition leader, parliamentary opposition leader, laying out the case there. He made the point about electoral manipulation. He makes the point about external interference in the election, and the fact that one narrative has been put out there by the PPP and that the other narrative has not been given the same kind of coverage in the mainstream media. And of course, we will be looking forward to that documentary. Joe, when will that documentary be released?
It's been released, David, and it is in public. It is in circulation now. I'd ask maybe Andrew if on one of your programs, even if you have to assist in funding it, to show it's a documentary for 1 hour. And it's a very well put together documentary by our team, and I'm very proud of the work that they have done. The PPP, of course, as soon as they saw it, went overnight to create something called a raid on democracy, which was trying to answer what we had done there. But this was work that had taken us months to put together all the various pieces. And so overnight they were trying to respond to it and did a very messy job of trying to respond. But of course, David, there is no response to it. There's no response. You know, over all of this entire year that has passed, you have never heard the PPP trying to justify at any time those 11,000 votes that had no statutory documents inside it. I've never heard a justification from any senior person in the PPP on those things which we found at the Artichon Conference Center at the recount. No justification. So I think they have actually decided that rather than trying to justify, they will try to obliterate. And obliterate by virtue of their access to mainstream media and by virtue of putting out a narrative which is repeated so often that their supporters have actually now come to wanting to believe that that is the truth. But I think that the world is now seeing what has happened, and we are now getting our message out a little bit on programs like this, that people are now in a better position to properly analyze what has happened in these elections.
And of course, we are committed to carrying that documentary here on Politics 101, which is not just seen here on Facebook, but also rebroadcasted on Channel 9. So, yes, so we're both on this platform and on broadcast TV. So we'll certainly set aside next Tuesday edition to carry that documentary on the theft of democracy. And other the larger Cams TV platform. So I know you're short on time. We want to make as much use of your time here.
Yes.
We have a big panel coming up after you, but I want to pin you down on this
Yes.
issue of national security and
Yes.
security in general.
Yes.
Um, what has happened as far as national security is concerned over the last year? Bearing in mind that the PPP historically has always tried to take control of the military sector, the police, the national security sector. And from the first hour that they came to office, they showed signal of tampering with the national security system. So I am asking you that open question. How would you characterize the national security situation under the PPP over the last year?
David, this has been a catastrophe. I would call it a security catastrophe because what they did, the PPP inherited a very, very good security pitch. It's like when you play in cricket, the pitch is well prepared, it's well rolled. And so when you go into bat, everything you see in the ball big like a breadfruit. The point is that they inherited a very good security situation. One, we had actually removed this country from being on the blacklist, the anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism blacklist. We became so good at it that our staff in this country at the Ministry of Legal Affairs were actually able to go about into the region and in other places and to advise people how to get their houses in order and to get out of this status. So we had we cleaned up that. We cleaned up the police force. In fact, had so much work done with the police force that officers were going all around the world and observing best practices in those countries. And all of these were actually, some of them were scholarships, some of them were paid for by the state. Because what we wanted to do was to ensure that we had a very strong police force that was unbribable and that we had officers and ranks who understood that the purpose was service and protection and not about scamming people and shaking them down. So that was something which we had to work assiduously to clean up. And I believe that we have done an excellent job where that was concerned. We actually brought in the largest set of equipment the police had ever received during our time. All the motor cars, the motorcycles, and all of that. Huge amount of resources spent on the police force. At the same time, of course, the army was getting their resources as well. So what we had was a security architecture that was on a very strong footing. And so we were able to reduce piracy. Piracy almost went to zero. So the fishermen were able to go out and fish without worry that they would be hijacked and so on. Cross-border narcotic trade and gun trade, we almost brought that down to zero. Very often when aircraft come into this country and seek to land and discharge their contraband, as was known in the past, we were able to detect it, arrest people, take them to court. What has happened since August of 2020, David, is that the entire security architecture has now become so muddled because this is the way the PPP functions. They function in situations of uncertainty and situations in which there are no laws or no rules. It's a regime of lawlessness. This is what the PPP can do best. And so what has happened? What are the impacts of what we have seen? One, within the first month of them being in office, the largest drug bust in the world occurring in Europe. The second month, another large drug bust. One in Belgium, the other one in Germany. Those drug busts, the street value of that drug was almost as much as our budget for 2021. So you
Mm-hmm.
can understand the nature of this this underground beast that the PPP they were trying to resurface that was there for 23 years before we came into office. So security was a major problem. Detection of these issues at the borders, at the customs, all of that the PPP mashed up. We had set up something called a National Anti-Narcotic Agency, and that agency coordinated the fight against illegal drug in all of the agencies, the police, the army, the customs, and the Guyana Revenue Authority. And so there was a coordinating mechanism that brought all of these forces together. The first thing the PP did when they came into office was to dismantle that. The second thing they did was to bring back James Singh, who had been dismissed. Bring him back and put him in charge of Kanu. And so what you had now were the old players back in position, and all of the old connections start flowing again. And so we have become again now a major drug transshipment point for the rest of the world, not just the region. We are now on the map because of that for the rest of the world. So this is something that we have to be ashamed about. This is something that the PPP has made us the laughing stock of the world. But that apart, David, is the question of how the Ministry of Home Affairs have dealt with these things. We have had very early in this administration, I think might have been in the month of August itself, 3 young men brutally murdered. Isaiah Henry, Joel Henry, and Harry Singh, brutally murdered. And until now, they cannot have closure to that matter, despite the promises made by Irfan Ali about it. Until now, we can't have closure. And we have seen daylight robberies. In fact, David, until today, I learned that a business place in Garden Street, Kitty, robbed by gunmen of over $300 million, reportedly $300 million in gold or something like that. And so what we have now is small armies going around this country. Some businessmen have to employ the army for themselves, and then the gunmen have their own armies. So what we have is a security situation that the Americans call it a high-risk security situation in Guyana. And this is all brought about by this regime under Irfan Ali, under Barra Jagdeo, that understands that certain things flourish in an atmosphere of lawlessness. And what we are seeing is a flourishing of illegality and criminality. One of the worst ones was the actual shooting in front of Palm Court a few months ago.
Yeah.
Of that businessman in the bright lights of the cameras just not far away from the president's official residence, gunned down, 12 bullets or something in him, car drove away, and you know what? Up to now, not a single person is charged. All these big drug busts, I'm sure that they must have had some international trail tracking these things from Guyana to where they came, where they discovered eventually. All we can hear about here in Guyana is who erased the tape from the computer. And they're looking for somebody, brother in Sapphire. And these are, so what I'm saying is that these crimes are being committed, the perpetrators are walking free, and they are now empowered to do it again.
Yeah, Joe, let me ask you a pointed question here. Prior to the coalition coming to office, Professor Clive Thomas, co-leader of the WPA, characterized the state under the PPP as a criminalized state, in which he talked about the fusion of the criminal underworld and the state in Guyana. Are we back to the criminalized state?
David, we are back to a criminalized state, and we are back to almost being a failed state again. Because you see that fusion is one which is allowed. You see, the real state and the deep state are the two elements which collide, which come together to produce this environment. So what we are seeing here, in fact, and this is the way in which Jagdeo and these guys function, right? Because when you deal with economy later on, you will see how badly this economy has done in the first 6 months of this year. But it has now again been propped up by the funds and the proceeds from these illegal transactions and this deep-seated deep state that we are facing. So Professor Thomas is right. And it is that collaboration of the official state and the criminalized state that really has us in a situation where none of us can feel comfortable bringing up our children in a society like this where gunmen are the order of the day.
Let's move to another dimension of security. And this is the new security, regional security apparatus that the
Yeah.
PPP has brought in place. A lot has been said about it. Basically, your members have said that it is a new spy agency that the PPP is put in place. Do you agree with that? And tell us why you think the PPP wants to put in place a new spy agency. Is it that they want to create parallel security forces? Is it that they want to contain anticipated political protest? How do you see this new apparatus being put in place operating?
David, you've captured most of what I want to say on this matter, because this new crime fighting unit, that is what it is meant to be. You know, it came to the National Assembly under a request for funds by the Guyana Defense Force. And you know that the responsibility for fighting crime is that of the Guyana Police Force.
Yes.
The mere fact that it came under the GDF started to raise red flags. And when you got the explanations as to what this entity will do and how it will be deployed, you knew right away that this was a secret police. But I think some of the philosophical underpinnings of this is that the PPP, they never really trusted the hierarchy of the police force or the hierarchy of the GDF. And so what they decided to do is that they are going to try to smash the hierarchy of the police force and put in their own people there. But that has taken a little long. And so what they decided to do was to now introduce this thing here. I believe, apart from the fact that it's going to be a spy unit, I think it is also a unit that is meant to give a sort of protection to the regime. Protection to the regime. So since they don't have so much faith in the police or the GDF, you form a unit there that you control. And what we have to look at, David, is that the sums of money that are being spent, you will find now on your cell phone every minute or on your programs, there's what you call digital interference. And so a lot of this money, I believe, has been spent on digital equipment that's meant to spy on us, to spy on anybody who are in the opposition, to spy on anybody who seeks to oppose the PPP in any way, and to spy on some of their own friends who they believe will speak against them, and some of their own colleagues. So a lot of it has to do with spying on people and violating human and fundamental rights of citizens. And a lot of it has to do with the sort of problem that the PPP has in not trusting the security forces. I want to create something for themselves. But what they have done, David, is that over the last year or so, they have weaponized a large section of this society insofar as private security companies are concerned. And when you see sometimes on Facebook, the caliber of weapons that some of these guys are posing off with, you want to know if you're in a Rambo movie or something. But this is right here in Guyana. And so some of them, I believe, they are also afraid that those guns will turn on them.
Mm-hmm.
So what they do now, you create a little force that is there that will protect you against that. That is the only way I could see it. No other way. Now, the problem I have as a citizen, and most citizens will have, is that this entity is not a uniformed entity. And so anybody could come up to you with a card saying that I am from the security force and I'm exercising police powers. You see, so we have to now link this, of course, to the fact that Robson Ben released out of the prison 65 criminals, persons who were convicted for various crimes, serious crimes, gun crimes. They were in the lockup, in the prison, convicted by the courts, and released those people without putting out in the public domain some identification of them, at least the names. We went into the parliament and we questioned it, and they said they have to protect the identity of these people. So I'm saying, well, what happened to our identity? What has happened to the identity of those persons who would have given evidence in cases which got these men in lockup? So why do you want to protect that? So we believe, David, that some of these persons might have been incorporated into that same security force and given police coverage, given guns to move around with, and to try to intimidate, and in some cases, murder citizens, because the crime rates have gone right up. There's a lot of
Yes.
murder taking place in this country, David, that's not being reported. The police,
Mm-hmm.
they employed a new unit, a unit that is to deal with public relations. But rather than putting out information, they are suppressing information. So what the citizens now have to rely on are those persons who go around the country with their cell phones and a little camera that puts up stuff on the social media all the time. And so when you compare that information which comes out on social media to the actual reports that are presented by the police, you see the vast difference in what are the actual rates that are set by the police and the rates which citizens know.
Joe, you've painted a grim picture of the situation in Guyana, an over militarized state, a fusion of the state and criminal elements. So we have the criminalized state. We have these new parallel forces, parallel police force. It's a really grim situation. At some point, something has to be done. A year has passed.
Yes.
I would say I would characterize the response by the opposition over the last year has been cautious. Looking at the situation, as I have said on another occasion, that in some regards, one was wondering whether this PPP is for real. After a year, one cannot not come to the conclusion that this is for real. And you, as the opposition leader and your team, you all have taken a lot of stick from an impatient support base, understandably. So, what do you say to that base now, 1 year later, to give them the confidence that something will have to be done, something will be done under your leadership about this over militarized state, this criminalized state that is a threat to the security of all Guyanese, but particularly your supporters? What do you say to them?
Thanks very much, David. That's a very loaded gun there. I've been talking about guns, so you turned it at me. Thank you very much for that. What has happened, David, is that unless you have programs like this, the population generally, if they were to follow the newspapers, the regular television and the radio and so on, you would never even believe that there is an opposition in Guyana, because there is a concerted attempt to obliterate anything that the opposition says or does. And so that has an impact on our support base because they follow that to a large extent and they are seeing basically just the government saying this, the government doing that, and so on. So we have to rely on platforms like this to get our message out. And I can say to you that we have confronted this regime on every opportunity that we have. In the National Assembly, we have actually questioned every single action that they have taken. I believe they are now afraid to actually come to the parliament to debate us and to argue with us. And so, in some cases, on one occasion, they shut the parliament down for 3 months, and we had to really activate our international connections to ensure that that happened. But I have said this to you, and I said it to citizens, that we are dealing with an authoritarian regime. We are dealing with a dictator. And it is my view that anywhere dictatorship exists, it is the right and the obligation of citizens to resist it. It is your right to resist that dictatorship. Now, that resistance, of course, requires a massive amount of collaboration on the ground. It requires our supporters and everybody for that matter being educated and advised as to what is the courses of action that needs to be taken. But as I said to you, what we are dealing, what we are confronted with is apart from our media that is hostile to us, is now digital interference that interferes with our communication on a digital basis. So you will find sometimes you send a message because they have the capacity to be able to enter your platform and change that message. They can actually now be sending misinformation out to your base. So I will just have to ask that our supporters remain strong and remain committed to getting the truth from programs like yours. Randy Critchlow has this program, Sherry Duncan, and several other programs, some of our MP's programs, Mark Benchcop, all of these programs that are what I call the barometer of truth. But certainly we have the power of the people is what it is that we have to galvanize against this regime. We cannot fight with guns and bullets and all of that. But the strength of our voices and our collective voices, the power of the people coming together is a massive reminder that dictatorships don't last for long. It doesn't last for long. You had your own experience on I think it was on the 1st of August. Just making one call in Buxton and the number of persons is actually turned out there. This is what the people we'd have to do. But it requires, of course, a lot of traveling on the ground, organizing people, organizing them in their communities, and so on. Right now, every Wednesday, we have people who come out on their own at the Square of the Revolution for 1 hour, and they just display, they just show that they are pissed with what is happening, and I think that can spread. But certainly, what we're talking about is the ability of our elected leaders, the ability of our members of parliament, the ability of our political parties to be able to speak to our base and keep them mobilized so that we can actually confront this dictatorship at the appropriate time. I believe that after 1 year and so much has happened, that people have actually had enough of this. I don't want us to feel that there is a loss of hope. I believe some people are feeling numb based on all that has been thrown against them from the time the PPP came into office. But certainly, as an opposition, we will have to continue to work with the people. We'll have to continue to confront in the National Assembly and outside of it in some cases, but primarily in the National Assembly to deal with this dictatorship that has been entrusted upon us with the help of foreign forces.
Opposition Parliamentary Leader Joe Harmon. I know you have to go, Joe. There is a call, lots of calls here on this program for you to come back and do a full program in what they call a town hall style format, where the audience gets to ask questions.
Yes.
Can you commit to doing that?
David, I am committed to doing it. In fact, I'll tell you this much. On my when I have my press conferences, that the entire world, people from Jamaica, Botswana, all of these places, Guyanese, some of them, some foreigners, ask me questions on what is happening here in Guyana. And I have no hesitation in making myself available to answer any question by our Guyanese supporters. These are people who voted for us. Yes. They're the ones that have us here, and therefore I cannot consider this to be a request. I think it's more of an order, an instruction, which I take very seriously. And at the appropriate time, once you let me know, I will be back. You can change the format, maybe like a town hall format or whatever it is, but I'm prepared to do that.
Thank you very much for making that commitment, and we'll certainly work on it. One of the things that we have found, those of us who have been out here doing that kind of stuff, is that there is a loss of connection between our leadership and our followership. And I think all they're asking is for our leaders to do as you have done tonight, is to come on these platforms, come down, if you will, and speak to them in a one-on-one way, recognizing that some of them may be vexed with us. I mean, I get my fair share of views. I think as leaders, we have to commit to come and talk to them. And I think the more we do it, and I think the more we do it, we will be able to reconnect with our resource base, because we can't fight the struggle without them. And I think the point you are making is that any fight would have to include our people on the ground, both at home and abroad. Because, as that ambassador said, the election's bigger than Guyana. And so, therefore, in order to turn back what is happening in Guyana, has to be bigger than just in Guyana. So, thank you very much for coming on tonight. And we'll work with your office in arranging the town hall meeting. And on Tuesday, we will air the documentary. Then we'll have a panel afterwards to discuss the documentary. Thanks again for coming on, and we'll be in touch.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David, and thank you to your viewers and listeners. And as I said, I commit to doing that. And that's basically what I will do. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that's Joseph Harmon, opposition leader. We're going to take a short break, do our thing, and then when we come back, we'll have the panel of Amanza Walton Desir from the PNC, Takuma Ogunse from the WPA, and Kathy Hughes from the AFC. As you know, on this program, we are committed to coalition. We are committed to coalition. So we take a short break and come back to our panel.
Please help keep Politics 101 on social media and broadcast television. If you are in North America, please donate via Cash App or PayPal.
If you are in Guyana and the Caribbean and don't have access to Cash App and PayPal, email your pledge to dhines6106@aol.com and we will direct you how to get your donation to us. Thank you in advance for your donation.
And thank you very much, and welcome back to Politics 101. Those of you who have not made your donations yet or your pledge, please do so that we can keep this thing moving. We already start to get from questions from the audience about the donation for the town hall. We'll talk about that later on. We've gotten commitments from Mr. Harmon for the town hall. The WP executive, we've gotten a commitment from them for a town hall, and I have not yet talked to the AFC. This program is committed to giving the views of those whose views are not allowed in the mainstream media. So if the bias is to the opposition, it's deliberate. The government side has all the media at its disposal. It doesn't need Politics 101. There may come a time when we'll have to give the government perspective. For now, we're talking about those who have been locked out from the mainstream media. So we have absolutely no compunction, absolutely none whatsoever. No apologies to make for this program favoring the opposition. And there's a reason for that. So we're going to give coverage to the opposition parties, all of them, the opposition parties are welcome here to give their views. So we're going to do a town hall with the leader of the opposition, we'll do one with the WPA, and we'll do one with the AFC. So you get to question the leaders, because the other commitment is a commitment to you, the audience, in terms of bringing leadership closer to you. Closer they come to you, the more accountable they are. Let me bring in our panel tonight, Amanza Desir, Amanza Walton Desir, Kathy Hughes, and Takuma Ogunse. Welcome, ladies. For the first time, I'm so proud of myself that I have two ladies tonight, so that we are gender correct tonight. Takuma Ogunse is our next panelist. Hopefully, he will join us. Let me start off with you, Kathy. How would you characterize, in general terms, 1 year of the PPP?
I would say, first of all, let me say good evening and hi to you and my colleague Amanza and to everyone that's watching. I would characterize the last year of a rapid slide from a spirit and a feeling of hope that Guyana was moving forward with challenges nonetheless, but certainly a sense that we could all work together as a country and start to realize some of the gains we hope we would achieve from our increase in revenues from oil. I think what we have seen is that we've done a very rapid descent. The economy is not ticking. We know some of that has to do with COVID. But going from a stage where the IMF was saying that we were one of the fastest growing countries, we had consecutive growth for 5 years. We went to a scenario where there's a lot of animosity, a dangerous descent into race hate, perceptions of racial discrimination, increased unemployment by the persons that have been fired deliberately by the government, and of course, persons that have lost their jobs because of COVID. So this is not a good place that we're in at all. And most distressing, we don't have that spirit of hope that we could work this through together.
Thank you very much there. Kathy Hughes giving a candid view on a general characterization. Amanza, what's your general characterization of the last year?
Thank you, Dr. Hines. Good evening to your good self, and good evening, Kathy, and to your listening and viewing audience. I endorse all that Kathy has said. And for me, it has just been a descent into chaos. It is unimaginable that as a country, 365 days later, you can find yourself in the position that we find ourselves. There seems to be a sense of despair when you travel around Guyana and you listen to people. That is the word that comes to mind for me. People are in despair, they are in distress, and it is just a general sense of hopelessness that characterize people and their positions. It is so disturbing and distressing to see how we have slid down a slippery slope in such a short time.
Mhm.
And I endorse completely your sentiments. I have had the chance to move around a little to communities. I was on the picket line there at the Spirit of Revolution yesterday. Amanza, I met you for the first time in person. It seems as though we knew each other for a long time. And it just occurred to me we met in person for the first time.
This is true.
Yes. And we had the demonstration in Buxton on the East Coast. And I had a chance to talk to people. And people expressing that sense of fear and hopelessness. And you can see it doesn't come from the surface, it comes from deep inside. And I've been thinking over the last couple of days that we are entering a space that we have not entered since independence. And I'm saying this as a person who does not characterize our post-independence experience as being the best experience. But I have to say, in all my decades of political observation, I have never encountered almost a sense of spiritual fear that something in this country is about to come down. So I endorse what you're saying. Let's get into some specifics here. The whole notion of inclusion. We are a multicultural, multi-ethnic society, and any society like ours must have, at all times, pay attention to our collectiveness. The whole notion of inclusion, even if not in word, certainly in spirit. Have we reached the point of no return as far as inclusionary politics and inclusionary democracy are concerned, Kathy?
I could never accept that we've reached the point of no return. But I will say that it is worrisome and depressing that you don't see anything that will pull us back from the brink. When a year later you have a president that will publicly say that I'm not interested in speaking to you unless you say you like me. You know, if we had children in a schoolyard, two little boys, we would be saying to them, y'all catch yourself, speak to each other, because both of y'all got to sit on this school bench. So the fact that the president with confidence continues to repeat that I'm not speaking to you until you say you like me and you agree that I have won, that in itself is a start of a very, very slippery road. Any normal, decent individual that is mature, that understands, the tribal wars, that understands wars based on differences according to race. Any president or prime minister that wants to see his country progress for all its citizens would know that you have to be the bigger person, that you have to say, how is it we can at least, we don't have to agree, but how is it that we can tolerate each other in the interest of the greater good? So the fact that the Ethnic Relations Commission does not appear to be working. The fact that publicly they have had their own spats, unfortunately, commissioners with different opinions that appear to be based on race. And that is what the average man sees. And they've not done enough to change that perception if it is not an accurate perception. So, really, we don't see any reaching out across the aisles. Parliament really is a public cuss down with, no interest really in moving forward together. And so my concern is, how do you begin to build a country when all we're doing is amplifying the differences and saying that we got a war going on and we can't work with each other and we can't live together probably. So it's a dangerous time, but there's always hope.
A very dangerous time. Martin Carter, 1953, in one of his famous poems, "This is the dark time I love."
Yes.
All around the land, brown beetles crawl about. The shining sun is hidden in the sky. Red flowers bend their heads in awful sorrow. It has never been truer. Those images invoked there by Martin Carter, the brown beetles, of course, in those days, with the soldiers, British soldiers with their brown uniforms. And the brown beetles crawling about now are these secret police forces, these phantoms that have reappeared. And of course, the biggest brown beetle is the brown beetle of injustice against all whose representatives do not hold the majority in parliament. Amanza, inclusionary democracy under assault. Comment.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it's under assault. I think a lot of people do not pay attention to the fact that Article 13, which says that the aim of our political system is to establish an inclusionary democracy. This is not something that we've just plucked out of the air. It is a requirement under our Constitution. And so, this assault, as it were, on our democracy is alarming, to say the least. You have somebody occupying the seat and the office of the president who is literally saying that you must bow down to me before I acknowledge you. That is what he is saying. What is more alarming for me is that there are people who would condone such a position. Dr. Hines, it is very clear to me that, as you said, we are a multi-ethnic, multiracial society. And as you are aware, those societies are very difficult to govern if we do not believe in a paradigm of inclusion, because you either go to one end of the continuum or the other. The one end is inclusionary governance and democracy, and the other end is domination of one group by another. And I think, unfortunately, the PPPC has chosen the route of domination. And so what you are seeing is a manifestation of that paradigm, that they believe that they must dominate every aspect of society, socially, economically in particular. And this is what we are seeing playing out before our very eyes. And so when you, as Kathy said, as simple as two schoolboys fighting, you have to be able to reconcile, because you are in a system that requires you to reconcile. It is unimaginable to me that a right thinking head of state would say that for me to acknowledge you, you must first bow down to me. It is alarming, and it is an arrogance that I think will end up costing them, because the world is losing its appetite for arrogant, haughty, undemocratic leadership. And I think it will come back to haunt them. What I will say, however, Doc, is that people, we the people, can never lose sight that we are the employers of the government. And just like how we hire them, we can fire them. The Power belongs to the people. It was so, let me tell you, you see the saying that fear stalks the land? It is something that I am living.
Mhm.
It is so bad that people and friends that you have known for decades because you are an opposition MP are scared to be seen in your company. It
Yeah.
is so bad that even though people know that the manner in which they're going about, for example, dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic, even though they know it's wrong, even though they know that in some regards the government is trampling over people's human rights, they are afraid to speak out. Because what is the thing? Oh, the government has long arms. I have children. I have to think about them. You know,
Mhm.
that is what we are basically being browbeaten into cowering before the tyranny of the PPP. And the people must know that that is not an option. It's not an option.
It's not an option. I think we have Takuma Ogunse from the WPA. Takuma, are you hearing me? Takuma, are you hearing me? He doesn't seem to be hearing me. While they sort that out, Tati, let me come to you. And let's talk about this
I think
issue.
I think Takuma's speaking now. I don't know if you're
Takuma,
hearing him.
Takuma, you hearing me? You have to unmute yourself
Yeah.
because we're not
Unmute
hearing you.
unmute the mic, Takuma.
There seem to be some problems there, Mr. Operator. Can you please, Mr. Kunfe, and while we work on that, Kathy, let me bring you in
Sure.
on the issue of the economy, because you as minister, you were charged with one of the areas that is so important to the economy, and as a business person, you certainly have an interest in the economy. What has happened in the last year with the economy? You made mention to the cost of living, and you said that part of it has to do with the pandemic. So we are not saying the PPP as by itself caused the economic problem, but it seems I think I'm hearing you saying that it's the management of the economy that comes into question. Speak to that.
Absolutely. When you consider that, as I said, there are some massive disadvantages that the world is facing, that we are facing because of the pandemic. We know that a lot of businesses have contracted. We know that the market for many services in many businesses are not as viable and are not as strong as they were previously. Many businesses had to close. When you think of the entertainment industry, when you think of tourism, when you think of some of the goods and services that people might have supported in the past, especially small businesses, the small hairdresser, the barber shop, the lady doing some catering and going out every day and having her clientele. A lot of companies have staff working from home. So there's no question that the opportunity to earn through a legitimate business has been reduced. And the problem is that instead of actually building and trying to support businesses, especially small businesses, there appears to be a very deliberate attempt to discriminate. And that's why I say that, at a time when it's already hard and people need a job, the fact that the government is going to increase unemployment levels by sending home persons that work in government offices is totally unacceptable. That is a given. Those people should still have had their jobs. And maybe an approach from the government would have been, how is it that we could provide some kind of cushion to some of the smaller businesses and to the private sector businesses? When you look at all that has happened, it's amazing It's almost that somehow the world and Guyana itself is not happy with what is going on. So added to that, you've had floods, you've had rice crops, you've had fruits and vegetables, you've had persons rearing chickens, bees, every level of the economy. There has been serious challenges, and we've not had a program that deals with that reality. We've gone along as though it's okay. Yeah, fire, 300 people from Guyana Water, no problem. Fire 57 young men that trying to provide free internet to hinterland communities, no problem with that. A couple 100,000 children and people that don't have access to the internet at the time when you could only do business on the internet. Some of them you could only learn via the internet. Many people, it's lawlessness. It is total lawlessness.
Kathy, let me press you.
Yeah.
If you and the AFC had something to do with government at this critical point, and the state of the economy, what would you put in place as an emergency measure or emergency measures?
Sure. So the first thing I would have done is when it comes to our children and education, I would have made sure that the government was actually paying for internet packages, free internet packages, data plans, so to speak, for persons that are in school. So you know that at least at this time they are learning. So for teachers, for children of all ages, it would be a free data plan. It would be a free device. The fact that we have now close to 400 and something million in our sovereign wealth fund, I would have made sure that that committee of 20 persons was formed and in place. Why I would be going with a committee that has real representation is that there's already enough suspicion in the country, and therefore the fund cannot be managed by a few politicians that happen to be forming the government. And if the government changes by another small number of politicians on some other side, the whole concept of the fund was that you would have representatives from civil society, from labor, from education, from all the political parties, from NGO organizations, from the religious communities that would be able to manage how we use those funds. And if ever there was a time that we needed to be considering using some of that 400 million US dollars, I feel is now. And therefore, a more realistic stimulus package could be developed. I see some kind of whimpering in the press now that that's the direction they're trying to go into. But really, there's enough money there that all sectors, the small businessman or the lady I met in Sanford that lost over 125 chickens, she needs a check. She needs a check not only to replace the chickens, but she has to be able to build up the pens so it's not in such a low-lying area, so that she can continue to support herself and her family. And I'm only using chickens and bees and those specific examples that I've seen and persons have engaged with over the last, month or so. But we need a proper stimulus package across all the sectors.
All the sectors. And I think, yes, and I think that's where we're going. I remember when the idea was first broached about cash transfers, the PPP quickly says, we want targeted cash transfers. I remember saying, once the PPP says targeted, you know what they mean. And we're now seeing it. Yeah. What targeted means for them is targeting poor people of all races with small little handouts, and then targeting their supporters with big handouts. You notice the flood relief.
Of course.
Yes, $80,000 per acre. While people, the lady with the chicken They're giving them, I think, a small $100,000 or so. So I'm very glad that you raised that point. What we need is a comprehensive stimulus package across the board without discrimination. Tokuma Gonsi is there with us? Tokuma?
I don't see him.
I don't see him. Amanza, let me come to you. And I want to pin you on two things. One, how have we fared in the last year as far as foreign policy is concerned? And I want to say to my audience that foreign policy is extremely important because the coalition government was pushed out of office partly, or some would say largely, as a result of foreign policy. How have we fared in the last year as far as foreign policy is concerned?
Dr. Hines, I am concerned that we have not fared well. The events that have transpired over the last year, particularly as it relates to our foreign policy, suggests to me sometimes that Georgetown is not in control of our foreign policy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is dangerous. We have strayed away from some of our fundamental principles, cornerstone principles. And I'm not saying that you don't have to be dynamic, but when your foreign policy is so transactional, you can lose sight of what your national objectives are. Because foreign policy, of course, domestic policy operates within the context of your foreign policy, and your foreign policy informs what is a means to achieving your national objectives. And so when you do not have very clear objectives, which it is very obvious to me that the PPPC does not have, you are in danger of being, as we say, blown away by every wind of doctrine. If this transaction seems to be beneficial, you do it without consideration for how it affects all of your other relationships. Look at the Taiwan fiasco.
Yeah.
Look at the Taiwan fiasco. It's just typical of the dilemma in which we find ourselves. And then the other reason that I say we clearly are not in control of our foreign policy direction is that major announcements you learn about from outside of Guyana.
Yes.
We did not learn about the Taiwanese issue from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It was announced by another state official.
Mm-hmm.
When we de-recognized the SADR, we did not learn about that from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had to read about it in a Moroccan newspaper.
Yeah.
And so it is alarming. It is alarming. And what it says to me is that the PPPC does not value Guyana as ours, as our nation. They see it as a means to an end. And I have no apologies for saying that. They see it as a means to an end. And that is dangerous because Guyanese could find their country being sold out from under them.
Yeah.
Amanzo, if you were foreign minister, what would you do differently? Now, here are a couple of very important things. We have to deal with America. Let's cut through all of the niceties. Our foreign policy towards the United States of America at this point is very critical. If we sort that out, I think we can sort out a lot of things. What would you generally, without getting into all of the specific, think our position towards the United States of America should be at this time?
Our position to the United States has to be what it has always been. They are a friendly state, and they're one of our oldest diplomatic partners. The approach, I think, has to be first to develop and to continue the program of development that the APNU started in terms of capacity building in your foreign affairs. as a small country with small military, diplomacy is our first line of defense. And so you have to invest in training, you have to invest in human capital in terms of diplomacy, and you are able to then use that to come to negotiated position. You and I know that in foreign affairs, it is about what you are able to negotiate.
Yes.
And
Well,
to do that, you have to have the skills, you have to have the know-how. Guyana has produced some of the foremost diplomats in the world. A very small state such as ours was able to have a voice on the international stage because of the caliber of diplomats that we produced. And it is sad to see that that emphasis on capacity building is not there. It is completely gone. And this is why, we will be subject to the whims and fancies of lobbyists, etc. Because when you undermine the capacity of your foreign affairs and of your diplomatic corps, these are the results. And so that is one of the first things that we have to do.
capacity building certainly at a time when foreign affairs become very important, given the fact that we are now an oil producing nation where economic diplomacy is paramount. We have to develop the skills because when you sit across the table with the European Union, the Americans, the Canadians, you're really sitting across a barrage of technical people who know what the interests of their own countries are. And we have to develop, and I'm hearing you, Amanda, that capacity that is very clear what our interests are, what
Yes.
our limitations are, and what our general philosophy as far as foreign relations are concerned. So, Kumo say, are you with us?
Are you hearing me? I'm
Yes,
seeing,
I'm
and I'm
hearing you.
seeing.
Yes. Can you give us your general characterization of the PPP's 1 year in office?
I've been listening. I've been listening to the program, and I agree with almost everything that previous contributors made. But I think it's important for us to try to examine the PPP's 1 year as objectively as we could. And generally, the conventional approach is to make a kind of scorecard where you will probably look at things like the commitment to the manifesto promises, the legislative agenda, the way they handle the economy and the social problems, the way they deal with crime fighting, the question of governance, and then you will try to see how well they've been shaping up. But as some of your panelists pointed out, and I've been listening to the PPP presentation that they're saturating us on the TV and the radio, and they have already invoked the COVID pandemic and the recent floods as factors that were outside their control that have greatly influenced in a negative way the achievements in the 1 year. And whether it's the PP government or not, I don't think we could rule out the consequences of those two phenomena on the economic and probably even the political equation. But since I know that in Guyana there's very few things we could find common agreement on given the racial divide and the political divide, I will choose to address at least 2 or 3 issues which I believe the PPP can invoke the argument of COVID and the recent floods as a justification for their failure. And I think that they are important because, to me, they set the whole tone for the whole 5 years of the PPP's administration. And to make a long story short, I will start from the question of the election crisis and the political environment that was created as a result of that crisis, and the way in which the PPP, as a government coming out of that crisis, with a responsibility to act maturely and in the best interest of the nation, has failed to do so. And instead, what the PPP did, having coming out of that crisis, instead of recognizing the challenges posed by the crisis and trying to build a national consensus on how to deal with the problem, I think they began to deal with it in a very hostile and a partisan way. I think that any serious Guyanese who have experienced the election crisis would not need much convincing that as a nation we need to avoid that in future elections. And I think that there was in the equation, despite the partisan competitiveness, a national realization that we have to do something to reform our electoral system and practices so that we could avoid what took place. And I think that any government, whether it's the APMU government that came out of that position or the PPP government, any government coming out of that political situation, in my view, has a responsibility to guide the nation out of that crisis and to create a political environment for the country to move forward. The PPP, as I said, have chosen to be hostile and choose to be partisan. And they choose to take advantage of the control and influence over the police force, engage in charges, and to use the police and the court as a way of proceeding with their partisan agenda. The consequence of that is that they worsen a bad situation and created a political environment which the country now is grasped with. And I am very doubtful that we could come out of this situation in a hurry. One thing is sure, that the PPP will find it difficult to disengage. And I think that their failure on that score will hook them for quite a long time into this negative position. So I think that that is a major failure of the PPP government in the first year. In fact, this should be a matter that they should have addressed even the first 90 days. A better approach would have been to put together an impartial commission and have a commissional inquiry on the election problems and to allow that commission to guide the government and the nation on the way forward. But they choose hostility and they choose to create a negative political climate, which I believe will continue to haunt the country and them for quite a while. The second point I will want to raise, which I think is critical for any government that come to power at this historical juncture, is that that government has to recognize that the nature of Guyanese politics has changed. And we are not in the political engagement of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s. With the rise of oil and gas and the massive economic potential of that industry has created a new environment for Guyana, both economically and politically. And any government that comes to power at this historical juncture has, in my mind, a duty to recognize the challenges that pose to the nation by oil and gas, and to begin to prepare the country for a political discourse that will ensure that oil and gas don't do to Guyana what sugar did to us. We know that sugar, cotton and sugar, shape the historical injustices in the society, slavery and indenture, and all the fundamental inequalities that we're still struggling with is a consequence of King Sugar. And we have to ask ourselves what we want oil and gas to do for the country. And it is my conviction and contention that if political leadership in government and out of government is serious, they must recognize that oil and gas could either provide a situation where we are able to deal with historical injustices and correct historical injustices so that we could unite the country and to move forward in more harmony and cohesion. On the other hand, oil and gas, if it's not handled properly, will widen the political divide, will worsen the economic disparity among the ethnic groups in the country, and create one of the worst and dangerous situations that the country will have to deal with. And for the PPP have completed a year, and I don't have a sense that their leadership is prepared to prepare the country for that important discussion, because you can't have that discussion in the present posture that they're taking, and the other panelists have explained it in some detail, which I don't want to go into. The insistence that the opposition must recognize the government, blah, blah, blah. But my point is that any government or any political leadership in government or out of government that does not understand the historical challenge that oil and gas pose to the country and the new politics and the new governance style that we need in order to defend our national patronage and to ensure that oil and gas, play a positive role in the economic liberation of all our people, is not a responsible government. And the PPP over the last year have demonstrated on this point that they have no commitment to the nation. And I am certain that they're already discussing among themselves and the lackeys how to use the oil money to enrich themselves. So while they don't promote an environment and a national discourse on how to use oil and gas properly, I'm sure they already have well-developed plans to use the oil money and the oil resources to benefit their cronies. I'm sure of that. And I think this is a massive failure for the PPP, for me, in the first 1 year. The last point I want to make before I allow other persons to come in. I think that in the political engagement, and I'm not making this point as a criticism of the opposition, I am saying that, in examining what a government do, or this government has done in the last year, one have to look at it dialectically. To the extent that the government get away with a lot of the negative things which the panelists, and Mr. Harmon even earlier had identified, has in part to do, with what the opposition did or failed to do during the election crisis and after the PPP came to power. And we have to begin to look at these things, the dialectics of it, because the PPP behavior is influenced by their reading, of the politics of the opposition. And if they read that the opposition is in disarray, if they read that the opposition doesn't have the will to defend its constituents, then the PPP will behave in a certain way. And we have seen the way in which they behave. So I think that in understanding the PPP's 1 year, you also have to examine objectively and critically, what the opposition did or failed to do that helped to enhance the dominance that the panelists have so correctly identified.
Thank you very much, Takumo Gunsev, belatedly coming on to the program and giving his perspective on the situation in the last year. Let me bring back the two ladies in. Let me start with you, Amanza. There have been quite a number of observations about the use of parliament in the last year. And you as a parliamentarian must be aware of that. And I want to make an observation because 2 days ago in Parliament, in the debate on this issue of making it easier for people to get birth certificates, you were able to make the connection between what appears to be an innocent piece of legislation and its potential political consequences, its potential electoral consequences. And I remember when hearing you with that saying, aha, I didn't think about that. I'm political scientist and so on, but I didn't think about that. And when I heard you make that up, I said, well, this is the usefulness of the opposition in a parliament in which they don't have the majority. How do you operate? What's your role in that? And I think when you made that observation, I think you really, in a sense, end up educating all of us on the potential of the thing. If you're a normal citizen, you know how hard it is to get voted. And then you hear our government, but we'll make it easier. I don't like the PPP, but I want to get my birth certificate. So this is a good thing. And here is the opposition parliamentarian drawing our attention to the potential abuse of what appears to be an innocent piece of legislation. My long introduction to say, please explain for the audience what they were trying to do in Parliament here, or what they have done in Parliament 2 days ago.
But before I do that, Doc, I always thoroughly enjoy listening to Elder Takuma. It's always very enlightening and refreshing to hear his analysis. And look, again, as you have said, as with the discovery of the issue with the Sputnik vaccine, this is why we have an important part to play in going to Parliament. Had we not been in the National Assembly, that matter would not have been brought to the public's attention. Because what the PPPC is seeking to do is to ensure that an adult who might not have original documents or a birth certification is able to do so by fulfilling some of the loosest requirements. Now, we have to reiterate that we are not against any person having a birth certificate. It is their right, it is their entitlement. But what the PPPC was seeking to do was to sneak in a provision that says that a person who does not have original documents can go to a justice of the peace and simply swear a document, can get a toshao to simply swear a document, or get a statutory declaration under the Statutory Declarations Act. Now, what is alarming is that when you check other jurisdictions, you find that there are far more stringent requirements. You have to get affidavits from people who would have been present at your birth, some kind of school record, your immunization card. You have to establish who your siblings are. A whole host, about 10 or 11 different requirements, depending whether you were born at the hospital or whether you were born at home, to be able to have a birth registered. This is not what they are doing. And so I have said in the parliament that what they will attempt to do, and this is why the PPP is not calling for house-to-house registration, because they have not yet laid the groundwork to pad the list with ghost voters. They will give people in the far-flung areas, like I said, with complicit justices of the peace, with complicit notaries public and toshaus, they will register a number. At least 50,000, I understand, is their goal, Venezuelans. And then once these people have been issued birth certificates, then is when they will have an epiphany to say, oh yes, we must have house-to-house registration. So this persecution and prosecution of Keith Lowenfield and Roxanne Myers, etc., is a ploy to distract, to give their supporters fodder, and to distract members of the public from understanding what their agenda is. The PPPC is setting the system up in a manner that they will win an election before a vote is cast, because they know for a fact that the voters list has to be cleansed. They know this. And this is why they purged the General Registrar's office, because they needed their people in there to accomplish this. And I want Guyanese to understand the seriousness of it, because this is voter suppression as well. To the extent that you negate a person who is legitimately entitled to cast a vote by allowing a person who should not be casting a vote to cast a vote, you are suppressing the legitimate voters and their right to determine who governs them. And so this is serious, Dr. Hines, and this is why we have to be in Parliament. This is why we have to continue to be able to speak up in Parliament. Political action takes many forms. You have to have different strategies. We, as members of Parliament, have to fight in the frontier of the National Assembly. People must understand that what we say in the National Assembly, we say deliberately, because it is recorded in something called a Hansard. And that Hansard is a legally authoritative document. And so it is important that these things be entered in the records. And so we don't go to Parliament for play or for show. When you see we stand to speak, it is as a result of extensive research. It is as a result of having to be sure about what we are saying. And so this is why it is important for us. There is a place for agitation as well. And this is why the MPs go out at the Square of the Revolution every Wednesday. And we were so happy that you joined us the other day, because all of the strategies have to come together to bring pressure on the government. The PPP the PPP governs by attrition. And this is what the elder was just talking about. They do not have a willingness to do any of what he is saying they should do. They do not care to do it. The PPPC is bent on ensuring that Guyanese are so consumed with just their mere survival that they are able to get away with all kinds of things. A very simple thing that I want to bring to your attention. During the APNUAFC tenure in office, we used to have post-cabinet briefings. We used to have contracts awarded and published. That is a fundamental issue in terms of transparency and governance. That does not happen. And guess what? Guyanese are so consumed with how we are going to make 3 square meals a day that we do not even check on that. And what is happening while we are so consumed about our survival is that the treasury is being raped. The reason they cannot activate that natural resource fund is because they are borrowing against that fund. And so very, very likely we will find that when we are ready to activate it, there is nothing there, because they are borrowing us into decades and decades of debt. But they don't care, because their cronies and their families are getting ahead. And this is why I'm saying we live in 2 Guyanas. One where they live in luxury, and the other where people have to wonder where they're getting 3 square meals a day from. And that is pathetic. It is pathetic.
Kathy, let me bring you here, and I'm going to give you wide scope to talk about the role of Parliament going forward, and respond to anything that Ogun say or raised. So you have the wide scope there. You have to unmute.
I want to say that, as usual, we're all energized by the perspective and comments from Takuma. And I want to raise a very important thing, because he talked about the oil and gas industry and that aspect of, how the PPP is handling that sector. And, a week ago, very, very simply, there was an article about an oil and gas chamber of commerce that was formed. We, as Amanza has raised some of the interesting things that happened that just gloss over very quietly and very, as if we don't really notice it. There was an oil and gas chamber of commerce that was formed. The head of that chamber of commerce is another one of the traditional PPP quote unquote stalwarts, Mr. Maniram Prasad. And what was interesting in the article is that this Chamber of Commerce that was just started a week ago with the same usual suspects from the same one political entity is now claiming that they're asking for a position on the Petroleum Commission, and they're going to be the body that represents and be the voice of what they see is, another key sector that's going to contribute to the decision making when it comes to petroleum and oil and gas in Guyana. So we're heading again to a stage where when we want to make decisions about oil and gas, the entity that's going to speak and advise us is a PPP funded and backed entity. There were no applications for anybody interested to apply. Maybe they're going to do that now. But you see what I'm getting at, and it's exactly the same point that Takuma was making, and it's exactly the same point that Amanza was making. It's almost as if it's a puzzle to dominate, and there's strategic pieces of that puzzle that are being put in place. And in between that is a lot of screaming and shouting and cussing down and persecution and prosecution, whilst quietly the landscape is being made. How can a Chamber of Commerce that emerged a week ago speak for you and I when it comes to decisions regarding the oil and gas industry? On what basis did they feel they are justified to hold that position? When there are other oil and gas organizations that have been formed 4 and 5 years ago that went out of their way with limited resources and no support to try and educate Guyanese about the industry.
Well, put there by Kathy Hughes is coming down to program time. So I'm going to give each panelist a chance to give us some closing thoughts. Starting with you, Takuma. Closing thoughts? Unmute.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
It's a great privilege to be with the two sisters. They say I energize them. I could say they energize me too. And in the African philosophical position, it is almost automatic. We believe that the male and the female plus a negative, goes together. We don't make that artificial separation that other cultures make. So if they feel energized by me, they must be assured that I feel energized by them. I think that we are very good in Guyana, and the opposition has in its ranks, both in parliament and outside of parliament, persons who could adequately articulate the concerns of the opposition and the concerns of the constituency. But the reality of Guyana and the reality of dealing with the PPP is that once they are made to be comfortable that you would stick to the parliament and the parliamentary engagement, they feel energized, to proceed with the domination. And it is clearly that they have been very strategic in this last year. They're taking full advantage of the COVID pandemic and the restrictions and the limitations that impose on political action for the opposition and the country as a whole. And they're using this situation to hasten the agenda. They're going at a very great speed. But I think every country has to arrive at a point, and every people have to rise at a point to say when enough is enough. And you can't wait to say enough is enough when the regime has fully entrenched itself and achieved all its strategic goals. The challenge facing the nation and the opposition, not only the opposition, that's why I'm trying to put the responsibility wider than the opposition. The nation and the opposition is to make a calculated political decision whether it is better to lead a major struggle against the PPP now than to do it 2 years from now. You know, it's a calculation you have to make. And people are talking about, you know, in general in the country, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the American position. The American position, if you really want to take advantage of the newness of the government, is that the opposition has to create instability in the political equation to the extent that the PPP could have stability, which allows them to continue with the agenda, and the opposition of the country as a large can't put instability in the equation in order to get the thing back into balance. You know, we're not going to be doing much. You know, and time is not with us, because the dynamics of oil and gas is not the old politics that we could wait for in the 80s and the 90s, and we could wait for the next 5 years. 5 years of a PPP dominance in a situation where the economy is so dominated by ethnic groups outside the African and the Amerindian community. I don't think together we own African and Amerindians probably only 10% of the economy. 90% of the economy is out of your hands. And if something is not done very quickly to create a political environment and to have a government or a political understanding, okay, that is supported not only by internal forces but external forces to give justice, okay, to Guyanese in general, and to create a political situation that oil and gas and stability leads to real progress and the real correction of historical injustice, then politics would be a waste of time. We would be passing on to the next generation a very helpless situation that they will not be able to reverse in a hurry. So for me, time is not on our side, and we can't engage in normal politics in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. We have to recognize that the economics of the country and the reconfiguration of the various political and social forces in the country is going ahead at a rapid pace, and it could alter all the engagements in the country. The opposition has to make a strategic decision.
The opposition has to make a strategic decision. Amanda, before I bring you in, let me just read this because I think it has some significance. Leroy Nelson, one of the more active persons in the blogs online and quite knowledgeable, makes this observation. Amanza raised some factual matrix that everyone must take seriously. Baba Eyusi Kwayana can enlighten us on the PPP's historical actions around registration of birth and electoral fraud. I read that because sometimes younger activists, by their own independent action, fall in line with traditions that they may not even be aware of. Eyusi Kwayana was a genius at doing what you are doing in Parliament. Finding those fine things that even lawyers sometimes would miss. That's the observation there Leroy is making. I just wanted to point that out before you make your closing remarks. Go right ahead.
Absolutely. The PPP tried this in 2011. As recently as 2011, they tried this stunt. And so, you know, they go into their bags of tricks and recycle them time and time again. Look, I have to agree with Mr. Gonze that we are out of time. We are out of time. What you do and when you do it are equally important, because something done correctly but out of time will not achieve the desired results. And so I think we have to take what he is saying very seriously. I like that he also said that he has to cast the net wider than the opposition, because I like to make a distinction between the parliamentary opposition and the political opposition. One is a subset of the other. And so I think he also referenced support from internal forces. And this is where I say that organizations such as the union have a very, very important role to play. The unions are the legal representatives of workers and of public servants. And what you have is a situation where in my view, enough is not being done by the legal representatives to represent their people. So it has to be a net that is cast wider than the opposition. I believe the opposition has a catalytic role. I'm not trying to absolve us from that role, but we have to be able to understand and to appreciate when the time has come for wider action. Because as he has said, with an oil economy, time is not on your side. Time is not on your side. And so I think what we have to see is continually elders like Elder Takuma and so on coming back and offering that guidance and that advice that they have gathered with years and years and years of experience, because he's absolutely right. This is about the generations, and this is about our children that will come after us and the legacy that we bequeath. And the danger that particular segments of Guyanese society face of being second class and third class citizens in their own country. And so there is a sense of urgency, and it can't be business as usual.
Amanzo, Walton this year. Before I bring in Kathy to close us off, just to reinforce the point that what is needed is a broad opposition movement, a broad national movement, to say that Politics 101 and CAMS TV, along with some ground activists, have begun on the East Coast to do the little part. We started with the demonstration in Boston on Sunday, attracted about 200 people or so. They were out there for about 3 hours, and we are moving to Victoria on Sunday at 1 p.m. Victorians will be hosts, and of course we're inviting participation from far and wide. On Sunday, we had people coming all the way from Quarantine, from Georgetown, to join the people in Boston. And we hope that you can come out, because it's Victoria. But what we are talking about here is a national movement that includes all of us. I think Pata said, all are involved, all are consumed. So this should not be left just to the parliamentarians. As I've been trying to say here tonight, there's a role for Parliament, and intervention really reinforce that in the sense that you don't have a majority, but you become the watchdog there in Parliament, because at the end of the day, they have to go to Parliament to normalize and legalize even the fraud they're trying to do. And you have to be there in order to make that point. But we also need to broaden the struggle, and all of us have a role to play on that. So on Sunday, please join us in Victoria. More information will be forthcoming on the Bostonian Morning Time with Kathy Amsterdam in there for all the details that you would need for that demonstration on Sunday in Victoria. And of course, on the Square the Revolution, it continues there every Wednesday. We've been encouraging people to please join that demonstration. Ultimately, a movement is about linking our hands and our hearts and creating one struggle, one intervention, All we have, all we have, all we have are our bodies, our voices, our dignity. The tenor of the struggle will be determined not by us, but by the government and how it is behaved. Takuma has talked tonight about how this government has decided to be hostile. And by their hostility, are going to be determine the shape of the struggle. Let us not be worried about those things. All we need to do is to make sure that our voices are heard, our bodies are there as barricades, as defense of our communities. We must put our intellect to work. Those who are academics and intellectuals can help us to analyze the situation. Labor must come into the equation, as Manza said, the legal fraternity. Because once we are beginning to come into the public space, we need legal representation in the event that that becomes necessary. So as we go forward, we need to link all the pieces, but we can't sit down and say, what the leaders them are doing. We have to become leaders in our communities, wherever we are, because if we don't, 1 year from now, we'll be in serious, serious trouble. Kasi, you have the absolute last word.
No, but on a very serious note, I think we've had some very good final closing remarks, and I want to speak to ordinary Guyanese citizens. This gift that we have gotten of this new resource, this oil and gas industry, is a gift to every single Guyanese. And therefore, each and every one of us has a responsibility to ensure that you as an individual and your family for the next couple generations are guaranteed their share of this resource. Now is not the time to decide that you're too busy doing this, you ain't getting involved, it ain't able, it ain't gonna change. This is the time for the struggle. This is your country too. That's what we got to think. That's what you got to remind yourself, that you have a responsibility for yourself today and for your children and for the future generations. This is your country too. And 49% of us have a right to be part of the benefits that we are going to reap as a nation. So I want everybody really to stand up. This is the time to be counted. This is not the time to allow your wealth, your national patrimony, to be stolen from you. This is
there you have it. There you have it. Call to action. Call to action. And as we say, often when they talk about call to action, they think we're talking about violence. And we have to rewrite that script and not be afraid, saying that we've got to fight.
You know what, David, too, I should remind them, because fear is very real. It's rampant in the society. That is the PPP's modus operandi. And I want to remind people the advantage you have is the new technology. Everybody, more than 93% of us have a cell phone. Some of us 2 cell phones. And that is the weapon that you can use to really highlight the ills, to highlight some of the challenges, and to make sure that your voice is heard. We have to hear from you. Do not leave it to the politicians alone and the PPP to be talking all the time. You have a right to speak.
Thank you very much, Kathy Hughes of the Alliance for Change, Amanza Walton Desir of the People's National Congress, Takumo Gunse of the Working People's Alliance, lending their thoughts and their ideas tonight to motivate us to the next level of struggle. I thoroughly enjoyed moderating this discussion tonight that was started by Mr. Harman. We've got a commitment to all style intervention with Mr. Harman. We're going to pursue it. vigorously. And on Sunday, we're in Victoria. And those of you who are interested in the whole notion of ancestral lands, we're having a discussion in Buxton Sunday evening at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. Sunday, ancestral lands, reclaiming ancestral lands as Black economic empowerment. It will be at Tipperary Hall at 5 o'clock. But of course, for those of you who can't take it there, we're going to be streaming it live on TV. Somebody says that WPA should be in power. Another person says WPA should be accorded the respect that they deserve. Well, I hope the people from the WPA are listening, and they will continue to play their role. Until the next time, this is David Hines, thanking you for tuning in to yet another edition of Politics 101. And remember, on Tuesday, we will be airing that documentary, and we will put together a panel to discuss that documentary, The Theft of Democracy. Listen out for more of it. Good night.